Those who have been or currently are in the foster care system, what do you wish people knew? That we are human beings too, and large black trash bags are not luggage. I got really lucky and was placed with a decent family that didn't treat me like a second-class citizen. I was family. I've seen horror stories of other places where kids starve or are mistreated in their homes. I had the best possible situation, and I won't deny that at all. And #X200B, however. It's still so much to deal with as a small child. Remember when you were a kid and you cried when left at the babysitter's? Imagine going to live at the babysitter's house. My mom wasn't a bad mom. She was a troubled woman trying to get away from an abuser. I was in the home for about half a decade, which is an eternity as a small kid. At 10, half my life had been split between two moms, and I wasn't sure what I was allowed to feel. When I finally went back home, would my real mom be upset that I missed my foster mom? Should I talk about missing my old school? And #X200B, the home I stayed at also had upwards of 4 foster kids at a time, who shuffled in and out. A bunch of kids from ages 3 to 16 who had been through some horrendous stuff. And there I was, a broken kid surrounded by other broken kids. It's a hell of an environment, no matter how good the parents are. There's so much I can barely even get anything out. I was in foster care from age 6 to 18, and it was the absolute worst thing that ever happened to me. The foster care system is deeply flawed and literally took me and my siblings' entire childhood away from us because of their lack of ability to give a single garbage about us foster kids as human beings. They trust deeply in the foster parents more than the kids. We all showed very clear signs of being abused. We had no medical records because we were never taken to the doctors or even a dentist. A simple investigation would have shown we were being mistreated in multiple ways. But they trusted my foster parents' mischievous smile instead, because it meant they didn't have to put the effort into looking into it, moving us to new homes, and losing what they considered to be a good foster home. I told my foster worker to her face every detail of the abuse, physical and emotional, that was in that home. She told me there was nothing she could do. Nothing. It's been 6 years and that crazy female doggy is still a foster parent. She recently had a toddler taken away from her because they found her boarded up into a room, literal boards nailed into the wall. And guess what? She's still a foster parent. CPS does not care about kids, their families, or anything that should be important about the foster care system. They make money, they get troubled kids out of their hair, and they pretend not to see what is right in front of them so that they don't have to do their jobs. Not all the social workers are like this, but enough that it's a huge problem. Just don't be a slong. Don't get rid of their personal belongings without speaking to them. Sometimes a ratty shirt or a torn-up backpack is all they have left of home. A lot of foster youth have experienced trauma that may or may not affect their behaviors, which is something you have to acknowledge and understand. When a kid does something that seems to make little sense, analyze their actions and try to determine what is going on rather than jumping to the conclusion that the kid is bad or that they are trying to upset you. Additionally, speaking of bad kids, when working with multiple kids, don't idolize one and speak poorly of the others. And don't make assumptions. I was a good kid. I didn't get into trouble and was quiet and got good grades. When I was older, however, they struggled to find a placement. Once I interviewed for a home, the social worker just brought me to a house to meet the family, but when the family met me they flat out said, openly, that I couldn't live there because, as a foster youth, I would clearly try to seduce their son, 15 to 16-ish, despite the fact that I was 12, I think, and had no history of acting out sexually. When I did get placements because I was good, the foster parents would often speak poorly about the other children to me or around me. When they had guests they would claim themselves martyrs of the bad kids while putting me on a pedestal. While they may have thought they were helping me or raising my confidence, it did not help me trust them and certainly didn't help the kids they female dog-eat about. Edit, TBF, a lot of foster kids act out sexually, even from a young age due to abuse or due to seeing sexual attraction as a form of love and reaching out for anything. Edit, another edit, just to thank you all for your support and the almost complete kindness and respect in this thread. I also want to mention a family that truly sticks in my head because I love them and the memory of them and want someone else to know of their goodness, and want to bring more happiness to this thread. I stayed with a respite care family when my foster family went on vacation, and these people were the bomb. They were older, lived in a wonderful relaxing place, and were sensitive to my quirks to the point where I did not feel scared or apprehensive after the first day. I don't remember their names but wish I could. But they told me they couldn't take in foster kids anymore, they were quite old, but every weekend they took in a new respite kid and that they focused on kids that they thought needed more care. I was a young teen, so they probably knew it was hard for me to find a placement. So they had me for a few days and they took me to the store to buy me foods I liked and took me to a historical site and let me near their pets. A lot of my families must have heard horror stories of abusive foster youth and wouldn't let me near their pets or kids, and just nourished me for the few days I was there. When I left they told me I could call them if I ever felt unsafe in my placement, which I regret never doing. Point is, there are good foster care providers. There are good people. And they were a few of them. My mom started doing foster care when I was in middle school. She was a single mother who already had 6 of her own kids, so it was clear to see that she loved children. When I was a senior in high school, she adopted her first foster child, a little girl who came directly to us at 8 days old from the hospital fighting drug addiction. A year and a half later, we had 2 more foster children, a brother and sister, whose parents were in and out of shelters, because they kept robbing others and being kicked out. They still had visitation rights for about a year and a half before one of them came back with a burn on her arm. After that, my mom adopted them as well. Then, my mom got a call that the first child we adopted had a 1-year-old brother in the system. You probably know where this is going. We adopted him as well. About 3 years later, my mom got word that their mother had another child in prison, and before they could even ask, we took her in too. She was a little less than a year at the time, but before she turned 3 we had adopted her as well, increasing the family total to 11. Most people I talk to tell me mom is a saint. I always respond with, she's either that or insane. What I do know is that 3 months ago I watched my 13-year-old sister, who I remember holding while she wrapped tightly in a blanket shaking at 8 days old, sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow as the Dorothy in her middle school play. All I could do not to cry was tell myself that I was sitting front row and she could see me. Then, in the same week I watched my 11-year-old brother win another wrestling tournament, after which I had to flex on him, to keep him humble. In the end they are all happy, healthy, and when I come home to visit they all run to give me a hug and welcome me back. If you're reading this and you're in the system now and feel like you're in a bad place, I want you to know that there are people out there who will love you and take you in as family. Life can be tough, but you're tougher. My husband and I were set to foster. We had done the classes, home study, everything. However, I was diagnosed with cancer and we were unable to complete. We were then denied when we reapplied when I was in remission. I was able to join an organization that partners with foster teens who are aging out of the system to provide mentoring services. I am in hour and I help with resumes, interview prep, job seeking, etc. I am also just an adult who is available to listen. There are ways to support the foster system if you are unable to foster a child. I am so grateful that I am allowed this opportunity. I went into foster care at 16. My mom had been beating me to the point of breaking bones for years. I have an elementary school pic where I have a black eye from her. I do not know why my mom doesn't like me. She started beating me when I was 4, so I don't think it was me. When I went into high school it got a lot worse. She started checking my hymen every month or so to make sure that it was still intact. She was obsessed with the idea that I was a promiscuous person despite never kissing a boy. I was raped when I was 16 and my mom had my dad drop me off at the youth homeless shelter that I usually stayed at, but this time they refused to pick me up. CPS had known about the abuse for over 9 years and never did anything. My parents are rich and white, my dad is a government official. My mom was so abusive that CPS had asked her to complete a parenting class when I was 13. She got kicked out the first week for bullying the instructor and the other parents. CPS still did nothing literally until they refused to get me. Now that you know my background, know that every foster kid has a tragic story. It might look different, but no matter what the situation, that leads to being separated is traumatizing. I already had complex PTSD at that point. I didn't act out. I was the type to freeze and fold in on myself. I never hated others, I only hated myself. I was weird, but it was because I had been so neglected. I didn't know how to shower properly or brush my teeth, and I ate with my hands sometimes. I lived in the Schlitter for a few months until I was placed 2 hours away in a town I had never been in. My foster mom was deeply religious and heavily involved in her church. In fact, the foster agency that I was placed through had a mandatory religion policy. My first day there, I forgot the foster mom's name. I was told to just call her mom instead. It made me feel sick, but if I called her by her first name, the family would get mad at me. When I asked if I needed to go to church, I was told that if I didn't, I wouldn't work out in the family. Church was really triggering because that is what led to my mom's happy fun time crusades. I was too afraid to be displaced. Once an older kid is displaced, they often don't get placed again. Displacing also always puts you up to the risk of being abused worse. 60% of the underage happy fun time trafficking industry is fueled directly from foster care. I threw myself into religion. The church taught that God sometimes has to break someone in order for them to finally follow him. I remember laying at the altar sobbing, begging God to forgive me and decide that I had been broken enough. The other foster kids were quickly reunified, so I was alone. The church gave my foster mom an excellent way to abuse us. Her bio kids always came first. Her daughter, who was in the same grade, went to mission trips abroad every break, so all the money my foster mom got through fostering went to that and spoiling her other child. She only got $600 a month for me, so she needed the church to help make sure that she didn't need to spend it on me. Her house was provided by a church member. I had to eat different food that was donated through church. There was one church member who donated a Costco-sized bag of tortilla chips, and they were all stale, so I would have to microwave them and then just eat that every day until that bag was gone. All my clothing was donated through the church. I didn't get new shoes or undergarments for over half a year. The entire year and a half that I lived with her, she only gave me $50 for clothing, and that's when I got shoes and underwear. I didn't get a backpack or a nice shirt. When my foster mom decided she didn't want to work anymore, she told the church that she needed to quit her job to take care of me because after all, foster kids are a handful. The church members started paying her to clean their houses instead. I started being starved. My foster mom would only feed me if someone else besides her and her youngest daughter were home. Her older bio daughter stopped coming home around that time, so I wasn't able to eat outside of lunch, even on the weekend. Her daughter used to just be passive, but she actively started taunting me around this time. I was treated as an idiot. It was just assumed that I was the dumb one and her bio daughter was the smart, lovely Christian girl. I never said anything because I wasn't sure if it was abuse or not. On the outside, everything looked great. My foster mom was an enthusiastic church member, heavily involved in the community. She had to quit her job to take care of the foster kid who is acting so bad that she needed to be there 24/7. Her daughter, that was my age, was well behaved, went on mission trips regularly, and never had sex. I also fit the part. I was failing my classes, I ate with my hands, and I was missing a lot of everyday knowledge because I had never been taught. I had been arrested for shoplifting underwear and food. The underwear was a thong, so I was seen as the ultimate charity project. Finally, one day, after starving me for over 3 months, she picked me up from school and told me that God had let her see where my mom was coming from, and that's why she had been starving me. She dropped me off at therapy, and I told my therapist that part, and I was removed a few days later. The home that I was placed in afterwards was a social worker's house. She had just completed her master's and was actually volunteering at the shelter that I had originally lived in. Her husband was a retired Marine. Their house was the same exact story. CPS attracts people who need to feel control. Whether that be sexual predators, abusers, or neglectors. The people who would speak up against this injustice happen to be children. Very few of those who make it through choose to openly talk about it in public. On the surface, the kids look terrible, and that's all that society sees. They don't see the real reasons why the kids are behaving poorly. They rarely look at the foster parent.